When it comes to true crime cases, it doesn't usually take the authorities long to figure out who the responsible parties are and bring the case to a close. But some crimes contain strange and often inexplicable twists that take years to untangle, many of which remain unsolved to this day. Number 10. The mystery surrounding a man named Artemis Ogaltree in room 1046 in the Hotel President in Kansas City is one that is begging to be solved, but the chances of that ever happening are extremely slim. It all started on the morning of the 4th of January, 1935, when the switchboard operator at the hotel noticed that the phone in room 1046 had been left off the hook for quite some time. She sent the bellboy, a man named Randolph, to investigate, and when he arrived at the room, he noticed that the occupant had left a Do Not Disturb sign on the handle. He decided to knock anyway, and at first received no answer, but when he knocked again, he heard a man's voice from inside instructing him to come in, but to turn the lights on as he stepped inside. He'd spoken to the man in the room a few times and noticed the voice sounded different this time. Nevertheless, he turned the door handle, but found that it was locked from the inside. He decided to speak to the man through the door and informed him that his phone was off the hook before leaving to attend to his other duties. 90 minutes later, at 8:30 a.m., the operator noticed the phone still had not been placed back on its hook, and this time, a bellboy named Howard was sent to investigate. He came upon the same scene, with the door locked from the inside, and unwilling to wait, he used his master key to unlock the door. When he stepped inside, his eyes took a few moments to adjust to the darkness as the curtains were drawn and the lights were off. He saw the man lying on his bed with no clothes on and noticed there was a large dark spot beneath him on the bed. The nightstand on which the phone usually sat was knocked over, which explained why it was off the hook, and he quickly put everything back in its place. He assumed that the man had too much to drink, and not wanting to disturb him, closed the door behind him as he left. But this was not the end of the matter, as the operator noticed the phone off its hook again at 11:03, and the first bellboy was sent back to the room. He also entered using his key, but this time the horror of the situation became all too clear. This time, the man was on the floor on his knees and elbows, with his head resting in his hands. He immediately switched the lights on and realized that the room and bathroom were covered in biological material. Shocked by what he saw, he ran out of the room to report the situation. The police were baffled by the state of the room. The man's hands and feet were bound, and he had a length of rope around his neck. He'd been assaulted and attacked with a sharpened blade, and at some point had tried to get a glass of water from the bathroom but ended up shattering both glasses in the sink. Quite unbelievably, he was still alive, but only just. He told the officers he'd fallen over and injured himself on the bathtub and then passed out. Strangely, it was determined that he'd been attacked before the first bellboy arrived at the room, but he was unable to provide any further details as he passed away at a hospital shortly after arriving there. He had checked in under the name Roland T. Owen 2 days earlier with no luggage. He carried his hairbrush, toothpaste, and toothbrush in his pocket, and a housekeeper would later report that he always kept the room dark and seemed to be paranoid about something. The man told her that he was waiting to meet someone. At one point, he found a note in the room that read, "Dawn, I'll be back in 15 minutes. Wait." One morning, she found the room locked from the outside, but when she entered, she was surprised to see that Owen was inside. While she was cleaning, the phone rang and she heard him say, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I just had breakfast. No, I'm not hungry." Later on, she brought towels to the room and heard 2 men talking. When she knocked, she was told to leave since no towels were needed, though she knew that she'd removed all the towels from the room earlier. The police found that all of his clothes and belongings had been removed from the room, but they did find a hairpin, safety pin, tie label, and an unlit cigarette lying around. Fingerprints believed to belong to a woman were found but never matched to anyone. It was later determined that the man's real name was Artemis Ogaltree and that he came from Alabama. He'd sent typed letters to his mother, but she knew he didn't know how to use a typewriter, and furthermore, the letters were written using slang that he never used. Investigators struggled to understand why the man never asked for help or identified his attacker or attackers. Had he done so, his life surely could have been saved, but he never uttered a single name, and his case remains unsolved to this day. Number 9. Many people believe that 34-year-old Shirley Finn, the owner of a brothel in Perth, Australia, had her life ended because she was trying to blackmail the police, but her case has never been solved, and many questions remain unanswered. In 1975, brothels were allowed to operate under strict regulations. Only women were allowed to be involved in these businesses, and the workers had to undergo regular checkups. They were also regularly tested for illegal substance use. On the 23rd of June, 1975, Shirley was found deceased in her car by the side of Perth Golf Club. She was scheduled to appear at a tax hearing 2 days later, in which she planned to expose several corrupt police officers, businessmen, and politicians. She told these people that she would refrain from presenting her evidence if she was given enough money to pay her outstanding taxes. Hence, it was immediately suspected that one or more of the people whom she was accusing were responsible for the attack. The accusations would then come to light, including that Shirley was laundering money for several police officers and that she was having an affair with Ray O'Connor, the minister of the police, whom she told that unless he helped her financially, he would be exposed. One name that repeatedly came up during the ensuing investigation was that of the former head of the Vice Squad, Bernie Johnson. Several witnesses reported that Shirley had been paying him to favor her brothel under the containment policy, which dictated which of these establishments could continue to operate. Since she was already struggling with tax debt, these payments put further strain on her finances. Another witness, a patrol officer named Brian Eddy, would report that he saw Shirley in the police canteen on the night before the attack. After her body was discovered, he reported this to his superiors, who then immediately told him to keep quiet unless he wanted to end up like Shirley. He was approached by 4 detectives who threatened him with a firearm and told him to keep this information to himself if he ever wanted to see his children again. The case eventually went cold, but thanks to an investigation by journalist Juliet Wills, an inquest was held in 2017. Several suspects, including politicians, police officers, and a hitman, were suggested as the culprits. Evidence was found that the hitman, Nettie Smith, had been given the task of ending Shirley's life, but when this information was relayed to Don Hancock, the head of the Criminal Investigation Branch, the officer who approached him was told to let it go, and Smith was never questioned. Bernie Johnson remained the chief suspect, and while he was described by most as an honest and good man, others painted him as a violent and corrupt person who had attempted to frame innocent police officers. He even threatened to end the life of a woman who refused to help him frame one police officer. Several people reported seeing Johnson and Shirley the night before she was attacked. Wills told the inquest that Shirley's car trunk was never searched. The police officers trampled all over the crime scene, and several pieces of crucial evidence had gone missing. Despite a mountain of evidence and statements from many witnesses, Shirley's case was never solved. But it's only a matter of time before the truth is exposed, and the people responsible are brought to justice. Number 8. On Labor Day, the 6th of September, 1996, Shelley Watkins, her daughters, and her husband Jerry had been spending time at Cedar Creek Lake in Corsicana, Texas. While still at the lake, the couple got into a heated argument that lasted until they got home. There, the fight continued, and the pair eventually ended up in the house's garage. Shelley had decided to get divorced from Jerry. Thanks to the argument, she decided to do so immediately, and she told Jerry that she was planning to go into the house to collect their daughters, after which they'd be leaving for good. This was the last time that Shelley was seen alive. She was found deceased on the 13th of September when a group of fishermen found her floating in the Trinity River in Henderson County, which is located about 40 miles from the family's home. At first, they believed they'd found a package of some kind in the water, but when they inspected it, they made a shocking discovery. Shelley was wrapped up in a black tarp, which was secured with duct tape. When the tarp was unfolded, investigators found that Shelley had been bound with the tape and rope, and she'd been chained to 2 construction blocks before being thrown into the water. When Jerry was questioned, he admitted that he stopped Shelley from taking their daughters, but she then walked away from the house, never to return. Shelley's sister reported that Shelley would never have left without her children, and she believes Jerry is hiding something. It was then discovered that the day after the argument, Jerry took Shelley's car to have it professionally cleaned and fit with new tires. Days later, he visited a dealership to have certain parts on his own car removed and replaced. He claimed that Shelley had spilled paint on those parts. 3 months after Shelley was found, the family's house was searched. The garage was repainted and the driveway was repaved. Jerry was arrested and put on trial with E. Ray Andrews as the acting district attorney. But the trial was derailed when it was discovered that Andrews had been accepting bribes from people charged with DWI cases. He also tried to bribe Jerry, demanding that he pay $300,000 for his case to be dismissed. Andrews was arrested and given jail time, but as a result, the case against Jerry was dismissed. It's now believed that more than one person was responsible for ending Shelley's life, since DNA found at the scene could not be matched to Jerry or anyone they knew. Number 7. From the outside, 29-year-old Ryan Poston and 21-year-old Shauna Hubers seemed like the perfect couple. Ryan was a lawyer who truly loved his job, and Shauna was in the process of obtaining a graduate degree in school guidance counseling. The couple met on Facebook in 2011 when Ryan stumbled upon her profile and decided to message her. They started chatting and eventually met, and soon started dating. But somewhere along the line, things went very wrong in their relationship. On the 12th of December the following year, Shauna and Ryan were spending time in his apartment in Highland Heights, Kentucky, when she used a firearm to end his life. She called 911 to report what had happened and told the operator that she wasn't a murderer and that she was forced to fire at him in self-defense. She stated she'd been subjected to domestic violence that day and she was forced to defend herself. But then she made a startling statement. She added that after Ryan fell to the ground, she noticed that he was still twitching, and since she believed he'd pass away anyway, she fired at him several more times, ending his life. Investigators noted that Shauna had no bruises on her body, and that the apartment was very neat and tidy. They found no signs that a physical altercation had taken place. Shauna was taken in for questioning, and despite asking for a lawyer, continued to speak to investigators. They were shocked at her lack of remorse, as she made several jokes about the case, including one in which she stated that Ryan was thinking about getting a nose job, and since one of the rounds hit him in the face, she felt she'd now completed that procedure for him. At one point, she was left alone in the interrogation room, but the cameras kept recording. And during this time, Shauna danced around the room and could be heard singing to herself, and she was also seen snapping her fingers and saying, "I did it." At her trial, it was revealed that Ryan had told Shauna that he wanted to end their relationship. This caused her to become obsessed, and she often sent him up to 100 texts a day. When she learned that he was going on a date with the woman who was crowned Miss Ohio in 2012, she seemingly lost control and ended his life. She was found guilty and was handed a life sentence. Number 6. In 2013, Eric Richens was a successful stonemasonry business owner in Kamas, Utah. He and Corey Darden got married that same year, and as in their prenuptial agreement, they agreed that if they were ever to get divorced, neither party would have any rights to a business that was established by the other. The agreement did include a clause by which any of Eric's businesses would be transferred to Corey if he were to pass away while they were still married. 6 years later, Corey opened a real estate business. She started buying houses before renovating them and then selling them for a higher price, a practice known in the industry as flipping. The couple's lives seemed to be going well, but on the 4th of March 2022, all that changed. That night, Corey called 911 and stated that she found Eric unresponsive in their bedroom. When the police arrived, they did their best to resuscitate him, but their efforts were in vain. It would later be discovered he'd passed away due to an illegal substance that was found in his system, but Eric had never been involved with such substances, and his family became suspicious. When Corey was questioned, she stated that she and Eric were celebrating that night, since she'd sold one of the houses that she was flipping, and she'd made him a Moscow Mule cocktail, which he drank in the bedroom while sitting in their bed. When they decided to go to bed, one of their children complained that they were having night terrors, and so she slept in the child's room. At around 3 a.m., she awoke and went into their bedroom where she found Eric lying on the ground at the foot of their bed. She rushed over, and when she touched him, felt that his skin was cold. She then called 911, but a few things didn't add up. When asked where her cell phone was that night, she stated she'd left it in their bedroom and never took it to the child's room with her. But it was later discovered that her phone was unlocked and locked again several times during the night, and that she'd sent and received several text messages, all of which had been deleted. A year after his passing, Corey authored a children's book called Are You With Me?, which was intended to help children come to terms with the loss of a loved one. It also included a dedication from Corey to Eric, in which she described him as an amazing husband and wonderful father. But a friend of Corey's came forward to report that she contacted him in December of 2021 and asked him to procure medication for pain caused by a back injury. The man obtained the medication illegally and delivered it to her for $900. 2 weeks later, she asked for stronger medication and specifically mentioned the substance found in Eric's system. Just a few days later, Eric was found deceased, and the investigation was started. With this evidence in hand, Corey was arrested, and at her trial it would come to light that she'd been writing bad checks, laundering money, and had used altered documents from Eric's business to apply for mortgage loans. She applied for a life insurance policy in Eric's name, and she's alleged to have attempted to poison him once before on Valentine's Day. She's now been accused of fraud, witness tampering, and stealing over $100,000 from Eric's business. Corey has since applied for bail several times, but her requests have all been denied, and the trial is still ongoing. Number 5. Bank robbery is a very serious crime that is committed around the world on a regular basis. But while most bank robbers are intimidating characters who will do just about anything not to get caught, others are less proficient at that role. For example, in June of 2015, a 35-year-old man, whose name has not been made public, asked his neighbor to drive him to a bank, and the man was happy to oblige. But once there, the man entered the bank, and while pretending to be armed with a firearm, proceeded to rob it. The teller handed over $9,000 in total, but unbeknownst to the robber, a dye pack was hidden among the bills. As he returned to his neighbor's car, the pack exploded and covered him in red ink, and his neighbor didn't allow him to get back in. The man fled while his neighbor called the police, who managed to track him down very quickly and take him into custody. Bank robbers with such distinctive traits have often been given nicknames, such as the Michael Jackson robber, who wore only one glove, the Mummy Bandit, who wrapped himself in gauze as a disguise, and the Miss Piggy Bandit, who weighed over 300 pounds. Another robber who truly deserved his nickname was the Chevy Chase Bandit. At 12:45 a.m. on the 3rd of November, 1987, a man entered a bank on Wiltshire Avenue in Beverly Hills, wearing a blue business suit and sunglasses while carrying a briefcase. As he entered the bank, he tripped over a mat and fell face first onto the ground, but he quickly got onto his knees and had to scoot along the floor before he could get back up. He then proceeded to a teller and demanded that they hand over the money in their register, or face being attacked with a firearm. The teller complied, and the man left the bank with about $700. He was given the moniker the Chevy Chase Bandit thanks to the fall, which was similar to the entrance that Chevy Chase would make on Saturday Night Live. After reviewing security footage, investigators stated they believed he was responsible for 2 more banks in Los Angeles, and the hunt was on. On the 2nd of March, 1989, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired footage of the robbery, and just minutes later, a viewer contacted the police to report that the robber's name was Bernard Sabbath Buddy Strick. They recognized him as a member of their therapy group and added he was a former Beverly Hills criminal attorney, but he was no longer allowed to practice law since he'd started using illegal substances, neglected his clients, and had committed fraud. In 1980, he was sent to prison for voluntary manslaughter after ending a man's life and attempting to make it look like a break-in. He was eventually disbarred and then robbed 6 different banks, and as a result spent 4.5 years behind bars. Number 4. In 1947, actress Aileen Gibson, better known as Gay Gibson, was suffering from a heart condition, but she didn't let it stop her enjoying her life. In October of that year, she was aboard the Durban Castle cruise liner, which was headed to Southampton in England, after departing from Durban, South Africa. but on the 18th of October, she was reported missing when she was found not to be in her cabin and could not be found anywhere in the ship. A watchman aboard the ship reported that he got a call from her cabin at around 3 a.m. that morning, and when he arrived, he found James Cam, a ship steward, standing in the cabin's doorway. He told the watchman that everything was fine in the cabin, and so he didn't investigate any further. But when it was discovered that Gay was missing, the police boarded the ship upon its arrival in Southampton 8 days later and immediately interviewed Cam. He admitted that Gay had caught his eye during the trip and that the pair started spending time together. On the night of the incident, she'd invited him to her cabin where they were intimate, but she then had a seizure and started foaming at the mouth. When he realized she was no longer alive, he panicked since he was the last person to see her, and he threw her body out of one of the ship's portholes. When he was examined, investigators noted that he had scratches on his wrists and shoulders, leading them to believe that a struggle had taken place. Combs claimed that he scratched himself during the night, but a witness would later state that Combs told them about how Gay was struggling and scratching at him while he was trying to push her through the porthole. He was arrested, and at his trial, he was unable to explain why he hadn't called for help, which may have saved Gay's life. Cam changed his version of events 6 times and was no longer considered to be credible. He admitted that he'd made a mistake in disposing of her body, and he was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to be executed, but thanks to a change in the law, he was released in 1959 and started working at a restaurant as a waiter. He would then be sent back to prison again later in his life and eventually passed away at the age of 62 while still incarcerated after suffering from heart failure. But not everyone is convinced that he was actually guilty of ending Gay's life. At the trial, several witnesses testified that she suffered from several medical conditions, including asthma and a heart condition. Fellow actors recalled how she would faint and that her lips would turn blue until she regained consciousness. Many people also believe that Cam didn't do himself any favors at his trial. He took the stand with an arrogant attitude which didn't sit well with the jury that was hearing the case. While it's certain that he should have called for help that day, and that he should never have even considered disposing of Gay's body, it was speculated that he truly did panic and that he wasn't actually responsible for ending her life. Number 3. Bernice Novak lived a life of glamour when she was young. At one point, she was employed as a model for the Coca-Cola Company, and had also posed for the famous artist Salvador Dali. She married Ben Novak Sr., a hotel owner who founded the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. After Ben passed away, she lived a quiet life in an upscale community in Fort Lauderdale, where most of her neighbors had no idea that she was once famous and that she still had a lot of money. But in April of 2009, Bernice was found deceased in her home, and it was determined she'd suffered a bad fall that caused an injury to her head and led to her passing. Things went from bad to worse for the family 3 months later, when Bernice's son, Ben Jr., was found deceased in his room at the Rytown Hilton Hotel in Rybrook, New York. He was the owner of the Convention Concepts Unlimited Company and was hosting a group of clients at the hotel at the time. Ben's body was found by his wife, Nancy. He was found dressed in just his underwear, with his arms, legs, and mouth bound with tape, and it was determined that he'd been assaulted and that this led to his passing. As the investigation progressed, the police learned of an incident that took place years earlier when Ben contacted a former Miami police officer to report that someone had broken into his house, tied him up, and stolen all of his business documents as well as his safe. Ben knew that Narcy was involved, and she was tracked down with the safe in her possession. He agreed not to press charges against her, but then started having an affair and threatened to file for divorce. It was then discovered that after Ben lost his life, Narcy started selling his collectibles, stole money from his company, and convinced bank employees that he was still alive to gain access to his safety deposit boxes. She was arrested along with her brother, Cristobal Veliz, and several other people who were believed to be a part of the plot to end Ben's life. Under the circumstances, Bernice's case was reopened, since it was believed that her murder was also part of the group's plot against the Novak family. Investigators found a trail of receipts for money orders that had been sent to a man named Alejandro Garcia, who was known to have a criminal record. CCTV footage from the hotel placed him in the building on the day of the attack against Ben, and when he was questioned, he admitted that Narcy had hired him and an accomplice to end Ben's life. He also admitted to ending Bernice's life by Narcy's orders, and that he was paid $600 to carry out the attack. He recruited an accomplice, Joel Gonzalez, to end Ben's life, and he was also identified in the security footage from the hotel. Garcia and Gonzalez decided to testify against Narcy, and as a result were sentenced to 17 and 10 years in prison, respectively. At one point, Narcy's daughter, May Abad, was also considered a suspect since she was set to take over Ben's company, but she was eventually cleared of all suspicion. As for Narcy, her trial went ahead as scheduled, and she was found guilty of both crimes, for which she and Christabel, her brother, will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Number 2. In 1991, 28-year-old Glenn Turner was working as a police officer in Cobb County, Georgia, and according to his friends and family, this was his dream job. But he also told him that he wanted to be married by the time that he turned 30, and that he needed to meet the right woman. Then, one night, he met a 23-year-old woman named Lynn Womack at a party, and he asked her out. The pair began dating, and Glenn learned that she also wanted to become a police officer, but had failed that psychological exam, and then started working as a 911 dispatcher. The couple eventually got married, but Glenn's family didn't get along with Lynn, as she often kept him from seeing them and started controlling him. Even at their wedding, she avoided speaking to his family, and the following day, Glenn told his mother that he was going to alter his life insurance policy and that Lynn would be the new beneficiary. The marriage wasn't a happy one. Lynn seemed disinterested in her husband, and before long was spending long stretches of time away from home. She used his credit cards to spend a massive amount of money, and the family started to suspect that she was having an affair. Eventually, Glenn told them that she was planning on filing for divorce, but before he could do so, he came down with a severe flu. He told one of his friends that he'd never been that sick before, and that he struggled to walk and would shiver uncontrollably. On the 3rd of March, 1995, Glenn was found deceased, and a medical examiner determined he'd passed away from natural causes brought on by an enlarged heart. His family noted that at his funeral, Lynn was laughing and joking around with her friends, and that she was holding the hand of a male police officer. While driving to the cemetery after the funeral service, she started making phone calls to inquire about Glenn's life insurance policy. After the funeral was over, she moved away and never contacted Glenn's relatives again. But they did learn that she'd started dating Randy Thompson, a fireman in Forsyth County, and that she was pregnant with his child. 6 years later, one of Glenn's friends, Mike Archer, was working at a car dealership when he was contacted by someone who needed a car for a funeral. To his surprise, he learned that the man who passed away was Randy Thompson, and that he lost his life after contracting a severe flu. The cause of his passing was ruled to be a heart attack. Glenn's family contacted Randy's relatives, and they figured out that Lynn became involved with Randy while she was still married to Glenn. In 2001, tissue samples collected from Randy's body were tested. They showed that Randy had ethylene glycol in his system, which is most commonly found in antifreeze. It was also discovered that Lynn had convinced him to take out a life insurance policy, naming her as the beneficiary, and that the relationship had deteriorated thanks to her overspending. Randy had ended the relationship and moved into an apartment. In January of 2009, he was planning on spending some time with a few friends, but before he left, he received a call from Lynn, in which she asked him to go out to dinner with her, since she wanted to patch things up. He agreed, and after dinner went home with her. And there, he fell ill and had to be taken to a hospital. He was eventually released, and Lynn started taking care of him, and just 3 days later he passed away. Glenn's remains were exhumed, and tissue samples showed that he had antifreeze in his system. Lynn was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, and she passed away in jail in August of 2010. Number 1. On the 27th of December 2011, Russ Faria had been spending time with a few friends in Troy, Missouri, and when he returned to his house that night at 9:40 p.m., he made a horrific discovery. His wife, Betsy, was deceased on the floor inside the home, having been attacked with a sharpened blade. He immediately called the police and stated that he left the house at around 5 p.m. that afternoon, and that he and his friends had spent the evening watching movies. On his way home, he stopped at an Arby's restaurant where he bought dinner and then continued the drive home. He claimed that when he got home, he found Betsy had been attacked and that she was no longer alive. Russ was taken to the police station where he was questioned for close to 24 hours, and to his surprise, he was told that he was the main suspect. He insisted he had nothing to do with the crime, but his pleas fell on deaf ears, and he was charged with murder. Investigators stated they found a pair of his slippers in the house, which contained biological material belonging to Betsy, and so he was believed to be responsible for the crime. Russ's cousin contacted defense lawyer Joel Schwartz to represent him, and added that investigators may want to look into a 53-year-old friend of Betsy's named Pam Hupp, who'd reportedly been acting strangely. Hupp was known to have spent time with Betsy that day, since she drove her home and was believed to be the last person to see her alive. During the investigation, it came to light that Betsy had altered her life insurance policy just 4 days earlier and named Hupp as the new beneficiary. Schwartz questioned Hupp and found many inconsistencies in her story, but the police were satisfied that Russ was the one responsible for the crime and that Hupp was in no way involved. At Russ's trial, Schwartz was denied permission to name Hupp as a suspect, as the judge didn't think that the altered policy was enough evidence to do so. The 4 men with whom Russ had been spending time with that night all testified that he was with them when the crime was committed, and CCTV footage, along with his Arby's receipt, corroborated their statements. Nevertheless, Russ was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with 30 years added on. But in 2015, he was granted a retrial, and this time he was found not guilty. An anonymous caller contacted Schwartz and alerted him to the fact that she claimed her mother had passed away from Alzheimer's, when she actually had been pushed out of a window. It was also noted by the caller that Hupp was the beneficiary of her mother's life insurance policy. In 2016, she was arrested after ending the life of Louis Gumpenberger, with whom she paid to kidnap her, after which she was planning on blaming Russ for the crime. She was arrested and sent to jail for life, and has also been charged with ending Betsy's life, and that case is still under investigation. She will never be eligible for parole, and many people believe that she will be found guilty in Betsy's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.